When Bartimaeus heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." It was the job offer of a lifetime. When he was a boy, his father used to take him there in the evenings. And while his father, who was a professor of psychology, would talk about William James or Henry Bergson with the reference librarians, he as a boy would go over to the shelf and pull down a volume of the Encyclopedia Britannica, find a quiet corner, and flip through the pages, entranced. This experience sparked his love of books. And later, as a young man, he became a poet and a writer. And then in middle age, his dream came true. The government of Argentina announced that he, Jorge Luis Borges, would be appointed the head of the National Library. But it was at that very time that Borges learned he was going blind. There is a detail in today's gospel that is found only in Mark. Now, Luke and Matthew tell the story of a healing of a blind man. In Matthew's version, there are two blind men, but all three generally have the same details. The story happens near Jericho. The blind man shouts out, "Son of David, have mercy on me." The crowd rebukes the blind man to be quiet. Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man says, "I want to see." And Jesus heals him. But it is only in Mark's gospel that we learn the blind man's name, Bartimaeus. And this detail is significant. Back in 2006, the Anglican biblical scholar Richard Bauckham published a book that revolutionized New Testament studies. In the book, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, Bauckham shows that the characters who are given names in the Gospels were likely eyewitnesses who not only originated the traditions to which their names are attached, but also continue to tell these stories as authoritative guarantors, as living witnesses of their traditions. And in some cases, the evangelists may have well known them. In other words, Mark may have heard firsthand testimony from Bartimaeus about his own healing. And that is why Mark names him in the gospel, whereas Matthew and Luke leave him nameless, because they did not hear this story from direct eyewitness testimony. Borges, of course, was one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. One of his most famous images is he says, "I imagine that paradise is a kind of library." And to someone who loved books so much, to become blind at the very moment that he was to be in charge of almost 1 million books in the National Library, that is an unimaginable loss. So much abundance, and yet blind to it all. Everyone around him, his wife, his boss, so he doesn't have enough time to read. And then one day he takes his usual lunch break in the bank vault where no one can disturb him, and a nuclear explosion goes off. He is the only survivor. And in the final scene, the bank teller sits outside a public library, stacks of books arranged around him, ready to read with no one to disturb him for the rest of his life. And then he bends down, and his glasses fall and break. "That's not fair," he says. "That's not fair at all." And he cries out in despair. He is blind to the abundance of the books that are around him. But Borges did not despair when he went blind. In a lecture he gave many years later, he said that his blindness was a gift. "I made a decision. I said to myself, since I have lost the beloved world of appearances, I must create something else." And that something else gave him greater insight into our world. He would tell people, "It is the privilege of the blind to see. And that is the same about Bartimaeus. For what is important in our gospel lesson today is not that Jesus healed him of his blindness. What is important is that while he was still blind, before his healing, Bartimaeus could see Jesus for who he truly was, the Messiah, the Son of David. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. I once knew a priest who said that, we don't really know what Jesus said or did. And on the face of it, this claim sounds reasonable, although maybe odd coming from someone in the priesthood. The idea, maybe you've heard of it, is that the New Testament is made up of an oral tradition. Stories of Jesus passed down for hundreds of years before they were written down. Therefore, their veracity can be questioned. This is a common secular assumption, and it's found in some churches. Maybe you think this too. But Richard Balcom shows that oral tradition is different from oral history. Unlike oral tradition, oral histories are formed from eyewitness accounts of people who were there. And in the ancient world, for ancient Greek and Roman historians, the ideal eyewitness was not a dispassionate observer, but it was a participant in the event, because that participant could then interpret that event for people. And the Gospels under this scheme are really oral histories. They are based on the eyewitness testimony of the participants themselves, first written down when some of those participants, like Bartimaeus, were still alive. So we must be careful. All of us who think we can see, what we think we know about the Bible or about Christian origins can blind us to the abundant truth that is right in front of us. Though we think we see, perhaps we are actually blind. Borges became blind, and it was at that moment that he learned to see. Bartimaeus was blind, but he could see who Jesus really was, Son of David, and he could see how to approach him. Have mercy on me. And so the question is, do we have the humility to do likewise? Can we admit that we are more blind than we think? Can we admit that our deepest need might be to shout out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me?